This is Jack Stanley. I want to continue my talk on the American presidency. This is part 3, and I've discovered there's going to be a lot of parts to this. Now, I left off with Thomas Jefferson, who I often think of somewhat being a snake in the grass politically. He did destroy a lot of lives. He did some magnificent things as president. Also did stupid things. The Embargo Act destroyed the economy of the United States very badly. Actually, his attack dog, James Madison, who'd become president after Jefferson, after totally destroying Aaron Burr, after the duel between Hamilton and Burr, of which some really nasty things were said by Hamilton about Burr concerning him and his daughter, what Hamilton didn't destroy, Thomas Jefferson did. And so Burr is completely out of the picture. One thing just to mention to you, which I did not mention in the previous, there was a problem with the original design of the Constitution dealing with presidential elections. When an individual would run for president, whoever got the largest amount of votes would become president. The one who would become vice president was the individual who got the next highest amount of votes. Now, what this does is create a real septic, acidic situation. You see, the Constitution was written without thought of political parties. They didn't think of it that way. But in George Washington's cabinet was basically formed political parties. You had Hamilton and Jefferson within the cabinet. They fought like cats and dogs. They couldn't agree on anything. And within the cabinet of George Washington was born the Republican Party, basically. It had roots going back further. But basically, the party that would become the Republican Party in its beginnings was founded more or less in the cabinet of George Washington. So the Federalist Party was finished, pretty much. And Jefferson handed over the reins of power to James Madison. By this time, in the time of Jefferson's second administration, his second term, he ran on the ticket with a vice president. Aaron Burr would be the last individual who would become vice president due to the fact that he was second in popularity. Now, had Jefferson and Burr ran together on a ticket, it would have been an ugly thing, because Jefferson didn't like Burr, and he used Burr, took advantage of Burr. And of course, today, historians, without even studying it, dismiss Burr. It's a pity. But Jefferson, as I said, I think he did a lot of great things while not president. Of course, he was the scribe who wrote the Declaration of Independence, plagiarized from John Locke, of course. He wrote a number of great papers in Virginia. He was great with his pen. He was not a speaker. And he was known as the red-headed tombstone. The interesting thing as well is that after Jefferson's presidency, he would create the University of Virginia, which was a fascinating thing and wonderful thing. And a number of other things that are great. He also changed a lot of his papers around, changed his diaries around, just to fix the historic record in his favor. And let's just put one other thing into the equation. That James Madison learned to write like Jefferson so he could correct papers posthumously dealing with Jefferson to make him look better. You really can't trust a lot of stuff about Jefferson or Madison to that degree, because they worked in cahoots and they were very careful to keep a very good image and destroy anything that was incriminating. That's why, to a degree, the Adamses fared as poorly as they did, because they kept everything. They realized they needed to preserve the real history, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the downright frightening. So Adams did that. His son, John Quincy, would do the same. And those that followed became a ritual. But they didn't change it. Jefferson did. Madison did. So you really can't trust much what was said there or written there. It's suspect. But James Madison becomes the 4th president of the United States. And of course, there's a big issue with England. Now let's go all the way back to Washington's administration. Washington had issues with England, where they were basically stopping American ships and impressing seamen, taking them saying they're actually English citizens. Washington sent a delegation, John Jay. It was a disaster. Adams created the Navy because he was getting annoyed over it all. Thomas Jefferson damaged the field a lot by just having an embargo, saying, well, if we can't have ships out there, we just won't allow ships to go out there, and we won't deal with Europe. Well, that's sticking your head in the sand. That wasn't an answer. James Madison, of course, had to follow Jefferson's ideas initially, but then he realized how foolish they were. And of course, we had a war. It was an ill-advised war. It wasn't a successful war. It was not a war that we won. We barely survived it. Also, the White House and the Capitol were burned down. That is a story that has been said for many, many times by the United States, how the British came and destroyed it. What we fail to mention is the fact that we invaded Canada and burned down their Houses of Parliament. Of course, the British came down and did the same thing that we had done. We just fail to mention that usually. And I wanted to set the record straight. That was just tit for tat. That wasn't vengeance or anything of any kind. They weren't trying to just do something really nasty. They were basically being as low as we were. And of course, James Madison was chased out. James Madison, for a short while, was commanding the troops. Little Jemmy. He was the last president, basically, to stand and direct troops. Well, of course, Washington was destroyed. Capitol was destroyed, the White House, etc. And the war finally ends. And fortunately, you had John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay out there who signed the Treaty of Ghent. Of course, it took a long time for information to travel from Europe to the United States. And so the Treaty of Ghent was signed around Christmas Eve, I think, Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, 1814. In early January was the Great Battle of New Orleans with Andrew Jackson. We were at peace when we had that battle, but nobody knew it. And that battle would take a basic nobody and bring him into the forefront. Jefferson did not like Jackson. Most people didn't like Jackson, actually. At least those that were in the presidency. He was looked upon as an outsider. He was looked upon as a ruffian. And Nonetheless, we will hear about Jackson a little later. But James Madison served 2 terms, wholly unremarkable, nothing spectacular. And then we have James Monroe. Now, James Monroe had some interesting facts about him. First off, he kind of resembled George Washington. And he was the last of our presidents to dress in, well, colonial garb with the knee breeches and the like. And he was big, and he was admired. And when he ran for president, there really was no opposition. Nothing much. And he more or less won by unanimous vote. A couple of people voted opposite just to make sure it wasn't totally unanimous, so it wouldn't interfere with the vote for Washington. And so, of course, he would become the president. And that was known as the era of good feeling. And of course, during his administration, many things would happen. Of course, one thing that would happen, of course, is the Monroe Doctrine. But let's just take a look at something really quick. Who wrote the Monroe Doctrine? It was John Quincy Adams. Also, during the Monroe administration, there was a number of things that were done. Of course, Florida became part of the United States. We did a lot of deals adding to the country. James Monroe was a rather popular figure, but he did have that magnificent and truly remarkable Secretary of State named John Quincy Adams, who, as far as I'm concerned, was the greatest Secretary of State this country has ever had. And the era of good feeling went, came, and was gone. And we never had another era of good feeling at all. And everything would change.